The event, though unexpected, wasn't completely unprecedented. Humanity had long looked up at the stars, wondering if they were alone. Thousands of years of myth and speculation had revolved around the idea that somewhere, out there, something where someone was watching. But no one ever thought it would come to this. When the storm hit, it was as though the universe had decided to rewrite its own rules. In a small town in Nebraska, a man named Alex Porter was at home, recovering from a bad shoulder injury. The pain had been unbearable for weeks, and the doctors had told him his arm would never be the same. But as the storm's strange energy filled the atmosphere, something changed inside him. He felt it first as a tingling sensation on his skin, like static electricity building around him. Then, the pain in his shoulder vanished. Before he could comprehend what was happening, Alex reached for a nearby chair, attempting to stand. But as his fingers brushed the wooden armrest, the entire chair was ripped from its legs and sent crashing across the room. The force was so strong, it splintered the wood into shards. He stared in disbelief, unable to understand what had just happened. The storm had affected him, changed him. But how? Meanwhile, across the globe, similar events were unfolding. In the bustling streets of Tokyo, a teenage girl named Hana Kato had been walking to school when she felt a sudden pressure in her chest. Her breath grew shallow as a strange energy seemed to swell inside her. Without warning, she raised her hand to shield her eyes from the sun, and a beam of bright white light shot from her palm, disintegrating a nearby signpost. She froze in fear, wondering if this was some kind of dream. The news media struggled to keep up with the reports. Videos flooded the internet of people across the world exhibiting strange powers, some lifting heavy objects with ease, others producing fire from their hands, or even manipulating the air around them. People screamed in awe, fear, and disbelief. Governments scrambled to respond, trying to make sense of the chaos. But for all the power humanity had unlocked, no one could explain the source. The Creel, a race of highly advanced beings who had long observed Earth from the shadows, were the first to take notice. They were ruthless, calculating, and obsessed with control. For centuries, they had kept humanity under their watchful eye, convinced that Earth's primitive inhabitants posed no real threat to their dominance. But now, something had changed. Something unpredictable. The Creel dispatched their scouts, sending them to Earth to investigate the source of this new anomaly. A fleet of sleek ships dropped out of hyperspace above the planet, cloaked from detection. They were equipped with technology far beyond anything Earth had ever known, designed to neutralize potential threats before they became too dangerous. However, as the Creel monitored the situation from their ships, they were stunned by a new development. As the storm began to fade, humanity's strange powers didn't subside. Instead, they began to grow stronger. It was no longer a random phenomenon. It was spreading. People all over the planet were awakening to their hidden potential, and the Creel realized they were facing a force unlike any they had ever encountered. The humans were no longer just a curiosity. They were a ticking time bomb, and it was clear that this storm had changed everything. The once dismissed humans were now something to fear. Days passed, and the world struggled to adapt to the sudden explosion of human abilities. Governments had failed to explain the phenomenon. Scientists had no answers. People were both terrified and exhilarated by what was happening to them. The power surged in unpredictable waves. It wasn't just limited to the young or the strong. Everyone was affected. It seemed to be a universal transformation. In a small city in California, Ben Harper, a former soldier and war veteran, was at a bar with friends when the effects hit him. He had been nursing a bottle of beer when his hand began to tremble uncontrollably. His heart raced, and the muscles in his arms swelled, not with pain, but with raw, unfiltered power. Before he could process it, the table in front of him, a heavy wooden piece, loaded with half-filled glasses, was suddenly tossed into the air as if it weighed nothing. The glassware shattered in midair, sending shards across the bar, and the room fell silent. Everyone stared at him, not in shock, but in awe. Did you do that?" one of his friends asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ben didn't know what had happened, but when he looked down at his hands, he saw them vibrating slightly, as though charged with energy. His vision blurred, and a strange warmth surged through his chest, almost like a storm was brewing inside him. It was powerful, almost uncontrollable. He reached out, instinctively trying to grasp the air in front of him, and the tables across the room flew toward him with a terrifying force, the wood groaning under the strain. "Control it," he muttered under his breath, clenching his fists. But the power wouldn't stop, and that's when the doors of the bar burst open. A group of Creole soldiers entered. They were tall, humanoid figures with a sleek, alien appearance, metallic skin, glowing eyes, and an aura of intimidating technology. Their leader, a cold-faced alien commander named Tikera, surveyed the scene with a gaze that made Ben's blood run cold. The Creole had been watching, studying humanity, and now they were ready to take action. Tara raised a hand, and a beam of energy shot from her palm, striking the bar's walls with a violent explosion. The civilians scattered, but Ben stood frozen. He had no idea who these beings were, but he sensed danger. His instincts kicked in. The power inside him surged again, and this time he didn't hold back. With a primal scream, he focused his energy, unleashing a wave of force that sent the Creole soldiers flying backward, crashing into the walls with bone-shattering force. The Creole commander staggered to her feet, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Impossible," she muttered. Ben's breath came in short, ragged bursts. The air around him crackled, and he could feel the energy building, almost too much to control. His body trembled as though he might explode from the inside out, but there was something else. The same power that had unlocked itself inside him now felt like a part of him. He wasn't sure if he was controlling it, or if it was controlling him. "You're human," Tikera said, eyes narrowing. "The power should not be yours. It never should have been." As the Creole regrouped, their weaponry activating, Ben realized that humanity was no longer defenseless. No longer would they be the ones hiding under the oppressive rule of alien forces. No longer would they be at the mercy of beings who thought of them as expendable. The battle had just begun. In the aftermath of the bar incident, Ben Harper's life was no longer his own. Word of his encounter with the Creole spread like wildfire. Authorities, journalists, and even private groups descended upon him, all wanting answers to the same burning question: what had happened to him? Humanity was reeling from the sudden eruption of powers, and while some embraced the abilities with awe, others feared them. Governments scrambled to contain the chaos, unsure how to respond to a force they could no longer control. It was clear that humanity had crossed a line from which there was no return. Ben, though, wasn't the only one affected. People all around the world began to explore their new abilities. Some could summon flames with a thought, others could manipulate the earth beneath their feet, and a few began to exhibit telekinetic or telepathic powers. But there was one thing that was becoming painfully clear: these powers weren't just random. They were increasing in strength, and they were tied to something deeper. Dr. Lily Montgomery, a leading geneticist and professor, had been studying the phenomenon from the start. Along with a team of scientists, she began to notice a strange pattern among the affected individuals, genetic markers that shouldn't exist in human DNA. After a month of intensive research, she was certain humanity's abilities were not a product of random mutation or exposure to foreign influences. They were encoded into human DNA, hidden away for millennia. Her team discovered something that sent a ripple of shock throughout the scientific community. Embedded deep within the human genome was a sequence of genes, dormant for eons, waiting for the right catalyst to awaken them. The artifact that had triggered the cosmic storm had done more than just alter the atmosphere. It had activated these long-forgotten genetic sequences. The powers that humans were experiencing weren't new. They had always been there, buried deep within their DNA, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Lily's breakthrough came when she uncovered a theory that both fascinated and terrified her. The genetic markers were intentionally placed. The hidden powers in humanity's DNA were not the result of random evolution, but had been designed by an ancient, unknown species. But the true question was why. A chilling truth began to surface as the team continued their research. The genetic sequence in question seemed familiar to some of the alien artifacts that had been discovered in the galaxy over the centuries, all of which were linked to the Creel. They were old, older than even the Creel civilization. It was as though humanity had been designed to serve a purpose, to be a weapon or a force of destruction. The fact that these abilities were now awakening meant that humanity had been waiting for a trigger, something to break the seal, something to bring them to the forefront of galactic conflict. When Lily met with Captain Sarah Voss, leader of the growing human resistance, she shared her discovery. Sarah, who had been fighting the Creel's increasing aggression, was stunned. "You're telling me we've been bred for this?" she asked, disbelief lacing her words. Lily nodded grimly. "Not bred, created. A long time ago, someone, or something, created humanity for a reason. We were meant to be a weapon." The weight of the revelation settled heavily between them. Sarah had suspected that there was more to the cosmic storm and the Creel's interest in Earth than anyone had realized. But this took things to a whole new level. Humanity wasn't just a species that had been living in the dark for eons. It had been watched, manipulated, and perhaps even shaped for a specific purpose. But who had created them? And why? As Sarah absorbed the implications, a new sense of urgency overtook her. She realized that the Creel knew more about this than anyone had guessed. They had been monitoring humanity for centuries, aware of the dormant potential lying within Earth's population. And now that it had been triggered, the Creel would stop at nothing to prevent humanity from fully awakening to its power. "They'll come for us," Sarah said, her voice low but resolute. "They won't let us rise." And she was right. The Creel, watching from the shadows, knew that humanity was no longer a fragile, insignificant race. The war had already begun, and Earth had no choice but to fight for its survival. But as Sarah looked out over a world that had irrevocably changed, she understood one thing with certainty. Humanity's power was no accident. They had been chosen for this moment. The world was changing faster than anyone could keep up with. Humanity, once at the mercy of alien invaders, was beginning to turn the tide. As individuals learned to control their newfound powers, a shift in global dynamics was underway. Countries that had once struggled with division were now finding a common cause: survival. The people who once cowered in fear were now taking their place as warriors, leaders, and innovators. Ben Harper had become one of the most recognizable faces of the resistance. After the brutal encounter at the bar, he was taken into a secret military facility to be studied and trained. It wasn't long before he became a symbol of hope for the humans who were awakening to their powers. His abilities, raw, volatile, and fierce, were a perfect reflection of the chaos that had gripped Earth. But now, under the guidance of the most advanced scientists and combat trainers, he was learning how to harness them. Months passed, and Ben, along with a small group of gifted humans, underwent intense training. They weren't just learning to fight. They were learning how to think like soldiers, to channel their extraordinary powers into precise and calculated attacks. Each person's abilities were different. Some could manipulate the elements, others had telekinetic strength, and a few could even control time, distorting it for brief moments. But one thing united them all: they were no longer just humans. They were a new breed, a force to be reckoned with. But as humanity's training intensified, the Creel prepared for a full-scale offensive. Tikera, the alien commander who had encountered Ben during his first display of power, was not one to underestimate her enemies. After months of observation, the Creel had devised a plan. Their scouts had discovered that the humans were growing stronger, uniting in ways that no one had expected. If left unchecked, humanity's new powers could cripple the Creel's empire. The Vorak, an elite squadron of genetically enhanced soldiers, was deployed to Earth, soldiers whose strength rivaled that of the strongest alien forces in the galaxy. They were equipped with advanced weaponry designed to neutralize humanity's newfound powers. The Vorak's mission was simple: eliminate humanity's leaders, decimate their training facilities, and crush any hope of resistance. In the dead of night, a Vorak strike team descended on a hidden base where Ben and the Resistance were stationed. Their arrival was swift and brutal. Before the humans even realized what was happening, the Creel warriors unleashed a deadly assault. The ground trembled as the Vorak's weapons rained down, tearing through buildings and shattering defenses. The humans fought back, but they were caught off guard by the speed and ferocity of the attack. Ben, now more attuned to his abilities, was the first to react. He charged into the fray, his body radiating with an intense energy field. His powers, which had once been unpredictable and chaotic, now surged through him with focused intent. With a roar, he summoned a wave of destructive energy, slamming into the Creel soldiers with the force of 1,000 storms. It was enough to send them flying, but the Vorak were relentless. As Ben fought, he realized something terrifying. For every Creel warrior he took down, 2 more seemed to take their place. Their weapons, designed to counter human powers, were devastatingly effective. They neutralized telekinetic blasts, absorbed elemental attacks, and even reflected energy back at their attackers. Humanity's powers were formidable, but they were no match for the precision and deadly technology the Vorak brought to bear. Captain Sarah Voss, leading the Resistance from a strategic command post, watched in horror as the Vorak systematically dismantled their defenses. She knew they couldn't keep fighting like this. The humans were outmatched. And yet, in the heart of the battlefield, something sparked within her. It was a revelation, one that Ben had discovered long ago. Humanity wasn't just relying on their powers. They had something more powerful: a deep, unyielding will to survive. As the Creel forces continued their advance, Sarah made a bold decision. She activated the Omega Protocol, a last resort plan that had been developed in secret by Earth's military and scientific leaders. The plan was dangerous, potentially catastrophic, but it was humanity's only hope of shifting the balance of power. The skies darkened as a massive energy cannon, powered by the combined abilities of hundreds of humans, charged up for its first trial. The weapon, designed to harness the collective powers of humanity, fired a beam so intense it cut through the Creel's outer defenses, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The Vorak soldiers faltered for a moment, stunned by the raw power humanity had just unleashed. But the battle was far from over. Humanity had shown their strength, but the Creel would not be defeated so easily. The beam from the Omega Protocol carved through the sky, striking the heart of the Creel's advancing forces. The ground shook beneath the colossal energy discharge, and a blinding flash of light engulfed the battlefield. For a moment, time seemed to slow, as if the very atmosphere held its breath. When the dust cleared, the Creel's outer defense lines were shattered, and their elite Vorak squadron had been thrown into disarray. Humanity had struck a major blow, but the Creel were far from defeated. They had underestimated the power of Earth's resistance, but they were quick to adapt. Tiara, the Creel commander, surveyed the devastation from a nearby command ship, her eyes glowing with cold fury. "This will not be the end," she said, her voice calm but steely. "Activate the Xarian blade." The Xarian blade was the Creel's ultimate weapon, an ancient forbidden device capable of eradicating entire civilizations. Powered by the darkest technology in their arsenal, the Xarian blade had the ability to target the genetic makeup of a species and destroy it at its very core, erasing all traces of life. The Creel had kept it hidden for centuries, believing that it would never be needed. Until now. As Tikera's order was carried out, a massive, ominous structure began to descend from orbit. The Xarian blade was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Towering in the sky, it pulsed with dark energy, casting an unnatural shadow across the land below. A deep, rumbling noise echoed as the weapon primed itself, its power slowly building. Meanwhile, on the ground, Ben Harper and the Resistance were celebrating their brief victory, but the mood was short-lived. They knew the war was far from over. Humanity's newfound powers had allowed them to hold their ground, but the Creel had too much at their disposal. Ben had felt the energy from the Omega Protocol, and though it had been an incredible victory, there was a sense of dread that lingered in the air. The Vorak had been weakened, but not destroyed, and now, with the Xarian blade descending upon them, they were faced with a new terror. "We've just won a battle, not the war," Ben said grimly, standing in front of Sarah Voss. "We have to stop that weapon before it's too late." Sarah nodded, her face set with determination. "We can't do it alone. We need to bring everything we have, every power we've learned to control, to stop the Xarian blade." The Resistance sprang into action. Using the knowledge they had gained from their training, humanity began to combine their powers in ways they had never attempted before. Elementalists summoned storms, telekinetics formed protective barriers, and those who could manipulate energy focused their strength into concentrated blasts. Together, they formed a cohesive front, hoping to mount a counterattack. But as they prepared to confront the Xarian blade, they soon realized the magnitude of the challenge before them. The Creel had anticipated this. Their ships, cloaked and armed with devastating weaponry, surrounded Earth in a near-impenetrable perimeter. It would be impossible to reach the Xarian blade without first neutralizing the Creel fleet. Ben clenched his fists, his body crackling with energy. He knew what needed to be done. The Xarian blade had to be destroyed, and the only way to do that was to break through the Creel fleet and disable the weapon from within. "I'll lead the charge," Ben said, his voice filled with resolve. "I've been to the edge of this power before, but I need to push beyond it. The Creel won't know what hit them." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes fierce. "We'll back you up, Ben. You're not doing this alone." A team of humanity's most powerful warriors, each with unique abilities, stood ready to fight by Ben's side. Together, they would face the ultimate test of their strength and courage. The stakes were clear. If they failed, Earth would be lost. The Xarian blade would wipe out everything they had fought for, and the Creel would conquer the galaxy without resistance. As Ben and his team boarded their ships and prepared to make the dangerous journey toward the Xarian blade, the weight of their mission pressed down on them. The knowledge that this could be their final stand was a bitter pill to swallow. But there was no turning back. Humanity had come too far to let fear stop them now. The sky above the battlefield was alight with the glow of energy blasts, the hum of warships, and the promise of a battle that would determine the future of the planet. The Resistance fleet ascended into the skies, its members filled with equal parts fear and determination. The world below seemed so distant, so fragile, as they charged toward the massive shadow of the Xarian blade, the Creel's most destructive weapon, now hovering ominously above Earth. Humanity's greatest hope rested on their ability to break through the alien fleet and destroy the weapon before it could unleash its annihilating power. Ben Harper, leading the charge, sat at the helm of a specially designed warship, his hand steady on the controls. Around him, his team, warriors who had mastered their abilities, prepped for the most perilous mission of their lives. Sarah Voss, captain of the Resistance, stood beside him, her gaze unwavering as she studied the battlefield ahead. "We can't afford to waste time," Sarah said, her voice clear and urgent. "If we don't disable the Xarian blade in the next few hours, it'll be too late." Ben nodded, the weight of the task pressing down on him. The powers he'd unlocked were incredible, but even he knew they weren't enough to stop the Creel alone. They needed to fight as one. Humanity's diverse powers, their collective will, and their unyielding determination to survive. The Creel fleet loomed in front of them, a swarm of sleek, menacing warships that surrounded the Xarian blade like a barrier. The closer they got, the more dangerous it became. Alien ships fired powerful energy beams, cutting through space with lethal precision. But Ben didn't hesitate. His team followed his lead, launching a barrage of concentrated energy from their ships, creating a shield of light to protect them from the oncoming fire. "We've got one chance," Ben muttered, his eyes focused on the approaching fleet. "Push forward. We'll handle the rest when we're close." The Resistance fleet split into smaller groups, each headed toward a different part of the Creel formation. Ben's ship, carrying the most powerful of the human warriors, surged forward with a force unlike anything the Creel had ever encountered. His hand clenched around the control panel, and with a shout, he released a torrent of energy that surged into the surrounding ships, destabilizing their shields and sending them careening out of formation. In the chaos, Ben's team unleashed their full might. A telekinetic warrior, Maria, lifted enemy ships from the ground, sending them into a chaotic spin. Julian, a fire manipulator, blasted entire ships with columns of flame, scorching the hulls of the Creel vessels. Meanwhile, Riley, a gifted healer, kept their forces alive, using his powers to repair damage and keep his comrades in fighting shape. The Resistance was breaking through, but it was clear the Vorak were waiting for them. Tikera had anticipated their every move. The Vorak were not just soldiers, they were hunters, trained to track and eliminate with ruthless precision. As Ben's ship neared the Xarian blade, the Vorak swooped in. Their ships were faster, more agile, and heavily armed, making them a terrifying foe. In a fierce dogfight, Ben's ship collided with a Vorak warship. His crew fought valiantly, but it was clear that even their enhanced abilities were being stretched to their limits. "We need to get to the weapon, now," Ben shouted over the comms. He could feel the power building inside him, a storm ready to burst forth. "Sarah, take command of the fleet. Keep them occupied." Sarah didn't need any further prompting. "Understood. You're on your own from here." Ben's heart raced as he piloted his ship directly toward the heart of the Xarian blade. The massive weapon was protected by layers of shields, designed to withstand even the strongest attacks. But Ben's powers had evolved. His energy surged, spiraling around him, and as he approached, he unleashed a focused wave of force, directly aimed at the core of the weapon. The Xarian blade's shields flickered in response, but it wasn't enough. Ben pressed on, pushing himself beyond his limits. The energy he released collided with the weapon's outer layer, sending sparks flying in all directions. It wasn't enough to destroy it, but it weakened the defenses just enough for the human forces to launch their final strike. "Now," Ben shouted, as the Resistance fighters, powered by their combined strength, fired everything they had at the Xarian blade. The entire field of battle lit up with a burst of raw energy as the human fleet and their combined powers converged on the weapon. The Creel fleet, now in full retreat, tried desperately to prevent the destruction of their prized weapon. But it was too late. The combined force of humanity's abilities had found a chink in the armor. With a final, earth-shaking explosion, the Xarian blade erupted, sending shockwaves through the cosmos. The massive weapon collapsed in on itself, its dark energy dissipating as the threat to Earth was finally neutralized. Ben, his body still crackling with the aftermath of the blast, breathed heavily, staring out at the wreckage of the Creel fleet. His heart was pounding, his mind racing. They had done it. Earth was safe, for now. But Tikera's voice echoed in his mind. "This is not over. The Creel will return." Ben turned to his team, his expression grim. "Then we'll be ready." The destruction of the Xarian blade sent ripples across the galaxy. The Creel fleet, once so powerful and confident, had been scattered and broken. Humanity had, against all odds, managed to destroy the most formidable weapon the Creel had ever created. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Ben Harper stood at the helm of the Resistance's flagship, staring out at the shattered remnants of the alien fleet. The stars twinkled faintly in the distance, but the echoes of the recent conflict still vibrated in his mind. His body was battered from the battle, but his spirit was unyielding. They had done the impossible. They had fought back against an empire that had underestimated them. And now the world, no, the galaxy, knew humanity's true potential. But the celebrations were muted. The victory was hard-earned, and the cost had been high. Thousands of resistance fighters had died in the attack on the Xarian blade. Cities across Earth were in ruins, and the scars of the war were beginning to show. Humanity had awakened to a new power, but it was a double-edged sword. The Creel, though temporarily crippled, were far from defeated. They had only lost one weapon, not their entire army. Sarah Voss, standing beside Ben on the command deck, surveyed the horizon, her face a mask of determination. "We've won this battle, but the Creel will regroup. They'll come back with a vengeance." "I know," Ben replied, his voice steady but filled with a deep concern. "But we've shown them that we're not just some primitive species. We can fight, and we can win." "But at what cost?" Sarah asked, her tone softer now. "Look at the damage we've done to ourselves. Thousands of lives lost. Cities burned to the ground. We may have won today, but the cost of this victory, it's more than we can afford to lose." Ben knew the truth in her words. The cost of humanity's resistance had been steep. The war had only just begun, and Earth was a broken planet, struggling to rebuild. Yet even in the face of such destruction, there was something undeniable about the human spirit. It was resilient. It was unyielding, and it would not be crushed. "We'll rebuild," Ben said, looking out over the destruction. "We have no choice. We've come too far to turn back now." Meanwhile, across the planet, humanity was beginning to regroup. The leaders of the resistance worked tirelessly to unite the fragmented remnants of Earth's governments. The fight was far from over, and the human race would need to stand together if they were to have any hope of surviving what was coming next. But the powers humanity had unlocked, though incredible, were still a mystery to many. Some were struggling to control their abilities, while others feared the consequences of further evolution. Dr. Lily Montgomery, who had once helped uncover the secret behind humanity's latent powers, was now more important than ever. She worked closely with scientists and leaders from around the globe, researching the origins of the powers and the mysterious alien entities that had set them in motion. She was beginning to believe that humanity's newfound abilities were not just a product of the Creel's manipulation, but had been seeded into their very DNA by an even older, more powerful force. "I've been studying the artifacts," Lily explained during a council meeting with Sarah and other key leaders, "and I'm starting to think that we were meant to have these powers, even before the Creel ever showed up. Whoever, or whatever, created us, they didn't just want us to survive. They wanted us to be a weapon." Sarah listened intently. "So the Creel weren't the first to notice the potential in us?" "No," Lily replied. "They were just the ones who awoke it. But someone else, long before them, seeded humanity with this potential. I think it's part of a much larger plan." The revelation sent a ripple of unease through the room. If humanity was part of a grand design, who had made them? And why had the Creel chosen now to awaken their powers? The mystery deepened, but one thing was clear. Humanity was not an accident. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the universe was taking notice. As Ben and the resistance leaders continued to prepare for the next phase of the war, they knew one thing for certain. The Creel would return. Their retreat was only temporary, but Earth had proven it could fight back, and humanity had a weapon the Creel could never have anticipated: their will to survive. And now, with the knowledge of their true purpose, humanity was more determined than ever to find the answers they sought, no matter where they led. The war had only just begun, but the resistance had already found its greatest strength, its unity. Together, they would face whatever the Creel threw at them, and they would win. The war against the Creel had stretched on for months. Though the destruction of the Xarian blade had been a monumental victory, it was only one battle in a much larger conflict. The Creel had retreated, but their fleet was regrouping, their forces building again. Humanity had proven they could fight back, But now the Resistance faced the most dangerous phase of the war, an all-out assault on Earth itself. And this time, the Creel had a new weapon, one far more deadly than anything before. Ben Harper, now a seasoned leader of the Resistance, stood at the front lines once again, but the pressure of the coming storm weighed heavily on him. He had witnessed humanity's miraculous rise, from a species fighting for survival to one that had tapped into powers beyond imagination. But the Creel were adapting too, evolving, and now the final battle was imminent. The Resistance had fortified Earth's defenses. New alliances had been forged between the scattered human governments. Yet, as the days passed, the skies grew darker as the Creel prepared to launch an attack unlike anything they had ever faced. The final strike would come at Earth's core, right where humanity's powers had first been unlocked. "We've known this day would come," Sarah Voss said, her voice steady, but filled with a sense of urgency. She stood next to Ben on the command bridge, her eyes scanning the reports. "The Creel will come for the source, the core of humanity's power. If we lose that, it's over." Ben nodded. It was the same conclusion he had reached. Humanity's powers hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. They were connected to something deep beneath the Earth's surface, an ancient force that had been waiting for millennia to awaken. And now, the Creel intended to take it for themselves, to wield its power and cement their dominance across the galaxy. "We have no choice," Ben said, his jaw tightening. "We fight to the end. We protect the source." The Resistance leaders gathered their forces, preparing for a desperate defense of the ancient power buried beneath Earth. But the odds were daunting. The Creel's new weapon, the Omicron engine, was a device capable of draining the Earth's core energy and converting it into a weapon of unimaginable destruction. If activated, it would obliterate the planet in a cataclysmic explosion, destroying the heart of humanity's newfound abilities. The Resistance had no time to lose. As the final assault began, the sky above Earth darkened with the shadows of Creel warships. Thousands of them descended upon the planet's surface, their weapons primed and ready. Humanity's forces rallied, but the battle was brutal. The Creel were relentless, their superior technology overwhelming the human defenses at every turn. Ben, leading the charge once again, felt the familiar surge of power within him. The energy coursing through his body had evolved since his first battle. He could feel the ancient force beneath the Earth resonating with him, as though the planet itself was alive, reacting to the threat that loomed. But as Ben pushed forward, leading the charge to the heart of the battle, something changed within him. The power that had once seemed chaotic, uncontrollable, now hummed with purpose. He understood now. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a purpose far larger than themselves. This was their moment to rise, to seize their place in the universe. The core of their power was not just a weapon. It was their birthright. In the heat of battle, Ben's focus sharpened. The Omicron engine was located deep within the Creel's command ship, guarded by a legion of their finest soldiers. Ben knew the mission would be suicide, but it was their only chance. He gathered a team of elite Resistance fighters, each of them possessing the powers necessary to breach the Creel stronghold. Together, they would infiltrate the heart of the Creel forces, disable the Omicron engine, and save Earth. Sarah led one team toward the outer defenses, while Ben and his group made their way toward the core of the Creel ship. The battle raged around them, but Ben's resolve was unwavering. As they breached the ship's inner sanctum, they were met with the sight of the Omicron engine, a massive, pulsating construct that seemed to throb with malevolent energy. The room was filled with a chilling silence, broken only by the hum of the engine. "We don't have much time," Ben said, his voice tight with urgency. The Omicron engine was already beginning to power up, the ground shaking beneath them as it activated. The team fought their way through the Creel guards, using their abilities to tear through the alien forces, but it was clear. The Omicron engine was nearly unstoppable. Even as Ben's energy surged to new heights, it wasn't enough to neutralize the weapon. Then, As if guided by instinct, Ben tapped into the core of his powers. He reached out, feeling the deep ancient force beneath the earth, and for the first time, he understood its true nature. Humanity's power was not just a weapon. It was a link to something far older, far more profound. With a mighty roar, Ben channeled everything he had into a single devastating blast. The force of it tore through the Creel defenses, disintegrating the Omicron engine in an instant. The explosion was cataclysmic, shaking the entire Creel fleet. But it worked. The Omicron engine was destroyed. The Creel forces faltered, their weapon rendered useless. Earth was saved. As the dust settled, Ben and his team stood victorious. The Creel had been defeated, and humanity had emerged as the true masters of their destiny. But Ben knew the war had changed something deeper than just the Earth's survival. Humanity had found its place in the universe, not as mere survivors, but as beings with the power to shape their own fate.